Kosher Wine Podcast with Dr. Kenny Friedman and Rabbi Yisroel Bernath.
Hi everyone, Rabbi Yisroel Bernath here. I just got back from an incredible trip to California. Kenny wasn't with me, so I'm doing this one alone, but he promised that he'll be with me for the next trip. I did a number of interviews, but this one was legendary. Today, we're about to embark on a journey into a vineyard perched in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Now, there, every bottle carries the soulful, heartfelt imprint of one man's devotion. I had the rare privilege of not just tasting, but truly experiencing the wines of the Four Gates Winery, guided by the legendary winemaker himself, Benyo, Benyamin Cantz. Now, if you know anything about kosher wine, you've probably heard whispers of the Four Gates Winery. It's a name that gets mentioned with a kind of reverence, usually in the same breath as words like cult wine or impossible to get, because it is impossible to get. This year, he put his wine on the market and it sold out in 45 minutes. Last year, I think even less, like 30-something minutes. So I arrived at the winery in the early afternoon, and I was honored to be with my good friend Shoshana and Ephraim Bander, who are very good friends of Benyo's as well. So you'll probably hear them a little in the back of the interview. The interview that we did was done as we walked the vineyard itself. It was just amazing just going into the vineyard, being greeted by the winded dirt road that keeps on going up the mountain for forever, it seems. There was this crisp mountain air, and there was a quiet majesty. It's the only way I can describe it. And it was something really special, just kind of this nonchalant interview as we walked the vineyard. The air is clean and the silence is deep. Benyo's an amazing person. He's everything that everyone said he would be. He is part farmer, philosopher, craftsman, and I think whether he admits it or not, a bit of a mystic. He lives on his land. He tends every vine. We were supposed to go to another vineyard together afterwards, but he said the vines need me, and he didn't come. He oversees every single step of the winemaking process, from the pruning to the pressing to the fermenting to the bottling. His operation is small. As we walked through the vineyard, Benyo shared stories about the land, the grapes, about his journey. He is today an Orthodox Jew, and he wasn't always that way. His entry into winemaking was fascinating, almost accidental, he said. That in the early 70s, he found himself caring for a professor's property in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And he fell in love with the land, and that love grew into a mission. He decided that he was going to create world-class wine that just happens to be kosher. And in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of a lot of others, he succeeded. Later in the day, we moved from the vineyard into his barrel room. And that was just also this incredibly majestic space. There was this rich aroma of aging wine and this quiet hum. Almost time stood still. Some of the people that were with us, they couldn't believe how many hours had passed while we were in the room. And he opened barrels and we smelled, and there was one wine, his Cabernet Franc, the new one that's in the barrel now. It was just so, the aroma was like perfumey, and the two of us, without even realizing, we're just standing there smelling it, and we looked up and we're like, oh wow. And I could have literally stayed there all day and just smelled that wine. So many of the other interviews that we've had on the Kosher Wine Podcast have mentioned Benyo, and he did not disappoint. It was amazing. And I understand why he's the legend, why he is the great person that he is. And I know if you, for some reason, Benyo, you decide to watch this intro, or you decide to even watch the podcast, thank you. Thank you for your time. I only realized when you didn't take me up on my offer to go to the other wineries how busy you really are, and that you gave so much time and you were so present for so many hours with us there. I'm so ever grateful to you. And so today's episode, it's my honor and my privilege to introduce you, if you don't know him already, to the legend himself, the great Benyamin Cantz, Benyo, and I hope you enjoy.
At the time I planted was the only grapes you could grow in Santa Cruz Mountains were Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Why? Because it's by the ocean, and it's if it weren't so cloudy, you could get a picture of the Monterey Bay out there, but it's too cloudy. Because if you're living by the ocean, it's cool, and Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are cool climate grapes. It turns out that you can grow anything in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It's warm enough, and increasingly, probably you can grow more types.
Was that a shock to you?
Yeah, I found a catalog in the library from 1891. It was a survey of all of the vineyards of California, a national survey, I think. It wasn't just a state survey. And it listed all the vineyards and all the varieties, the number of acres, and all the varieties of grapes that were planted. And I looked through Santa Cruz, and it was county by county. I looked through Santa Cruz County. Dozens of varieties of grapes were growing in the 19th century in Santa Cruz County. And in Napa Valley, 2 varieties of grapes. That's all. It was the exact opposite of today. People think you need all that heat to grow grapes, and now they're getting you to be afraid of the heat on account of global warming. But Santa Cruz had everything. So I thought, okay, don't be so worried. But nobody had any experience with Merlot. There was no Merlot in the Santa Cruz Mountains at the time. I just kept calling people and asking them whether they thought it would be a good idea. And then in the end, I tried it, and it's worked out great. It ripens all the time. I didn't plant Cabernet because Cabernet ripens about 10 days after Merlot, 10 days to 2 weeks. So if you're ripening Merlot in the middle of October, Cabernet is coming in November already. You can't. It's just a gamble to do that. The days are shorter, the days are colder, the rain starts coming down. It's too risky if you're growing grapes to wait that long. October is already pretty late, but so Merlot ripens here, and then I planted Cabernet Franc, which is usually a little bit behind the Merlot, but this year was pretty close. But Cabernet Franc that's one of the reasons people grow Cabernet Franc, is it also ripens a little before Cabernet Sauvignon. So it's a kind of an insurance grape. So everywhere there was a leaf on this shoot from last year, you can see where the grapes were. Mm-hmm. That will be a bud in the next season. That will be a new shoot that will come out. So let's say these are all pretty short shoots. Davis tells you need 3 feet of shoot to ripen 2 clusters of grapes, but mine are never, well, depending on the vigor of the vine, they don't get to be 3 feet, but they still ripen 2 clusters of grapes. So I don't know exactly how they come up with that number. But anyway, the point is that you get a new shoot with clusters of grapes on every bud. So the root structure of the vine can only bring up a certain amount of water and fertility to the foliage on the fruit. If every one of these if you didn't prune the vine and every one of these buds produced a shoot with 2 clusters of grapes on it, The vine, I did this, by the way. I did it the first year. I left a vine unpruned just to see what would happen. And it explodes with foliage, and it explodes with fruit. It's got 10 times as much fruit as a normal grapevine. And not only that, it does it earlier than the rest of the vines, the pruned vine. And it looks beautiful up until a certain point. The other vines catch up to it. Then the other vines pull ahead. And then at a certain point, these clusters just stop maturing. There's too many, as one winemaker who had her own vineyard said to me once. It's like having 10 kids each having your credit card. It's just every cluster is pulling for the same limited amount of nutrition and water. On the upper arm, even though the wires have gotten funky, I will cut everything off except this one, and this will be the one that produces 2 shoots. And these down here I'll cut off, and this I'll cut off because they're on the wrong side of the vine. This one, when it flops over, will shade these, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to cut these out and let this one get the sunshine, and keep this open so that maybe the light and the air can get into the canes down below, and keep them, give them more advantage.
How many bunches of grapes would you like from that one vine?
From this vine?
Yeah.
I'd have to count it up, but
How many can it hold?
some of these the vines on the end are always bigger, not always bigger, but for the obvious reason that the vines in the middle are competing with each other, and the vine on the end has, all the way out here, has where you're standing, roots can go out here and not be competing. So I've had vines like this. This one looks a little bit weak now. The shoots aren't very long, but I've had vines at the end like this that produced 2 like milk crates of grapes. Well, it's about a case of wine for each milk crate of grapes. So that's 2 cases of wine from one vine. And there are other vines here that are like that one. That one would produce a fraction of what this would produce. So
It seems so hardy, that vine, like really.
yeah,
And it can handle it has to be able to handle the grapes, right?
Right.
The weight load.
yeah. No, and the trellising system, you can see the wires and the grape stakes are not in such great shape after 30 years. But the way they test trellising systems up at UC Davis, where they have a viticulture department, is they build the system, but they can't grow the grapevine to find out. They just put the wires up and then they hang concrete blocks. And if they're expecting, let's say they're expecting 2 tons per acre or 3 tons per acre or 5 tons per acre or 10 tons per acre, there are vines in the Central Valley that get 10 tons per acre, and
Wow.
even more, 15 tons per acre. They just hang 10 tons of concrete blocks out on the...
So you think the vines can hold it?
So they're trying to find out whether the trellising system can hold that weight of grapes. So both Cabernet Francs. So we've got a barrel of each, so we can taste it. We can taste the difference. Except that the Cabernet Franc, the old Cabernet Franc, didn't make a barrel full, and I had to top it up with the other ones. So, but I have some left over that's just the original of it. So this lane here divides it. So this is Merlot, this is Cabernet Franc. Just this little wedge here is Cabernet Franc, and then below on the other side is the new clone of Cabernet Franc. One of the nice parts about this, this site is absolutely stunning because it's south-facing, which is the ideal direction to catch the most sun. But also, you can see the ridge of redwood trees over on the other side there. Well, there's a deep valley right below these oak trees right here. So the cold air from this site just slides off the hillside and goes down into the valley. So that warms this hillside up. It's usually 10 degrees cooler down below. So it warms this hillside up. So
You could feel it even as we went south
did.
just now. How
You
it
could
got
feel it?
cooler. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So the Pinot, you wanted it towards the valley.
Yeah, so I wanted it as the cool, I wanted to give the Merlot more sun and the Pinot more cool. So, and there was the root. American vines, French vines have to be grafted onto American rootstock. Do you know the whole story of phylloxera?
Phylloxera,
Yeah.
I know, but
So in the 19th century, the French vineyards were wiped out because of this root louse that destroyed the vines. So it turns out Native American vines are resistant to that louse. So even in France now, they plant on American rootstock because nobody has found a way to get rid of the louse. One of the rootstocks that UC Davis suggested that Californians plant their French varietals on, called AXR1 or AXR2, turned out to be not as good as they thought it was. So people who planted with AXR1, which some of the vines up there originally had been planted, had to replant with a new rootstock. So, plus the rootstock, not only does it protect you from the phylloxera, but there are several different issues involving the rootstock. One is how resistant it is to nematodes, how resistant it is to salt, what kind of soil it does best in, whether it's drought resistant. So, for example, since I was dry farming without irrigation, I got a rootstock that was considered to be drought resistant, 110R.
it may help you this year.
What's that?
I'm saying it may
yeah,
because
help
it's
me,
drought resistant.
right.
It may help you this year since
Right.
there's
Well,
not enough
no,
rain.
It's helped me right from the beginning because one of its qualities is that it can get into clay. It turns out that clay soils come in a vast variety of density. So you see soil scientists, they come in, they take a piece of clay, they roll it up into a little cigarette, and then they bend it. And how quickly it breaks tells them what the composition of the soil is. If it doesn't break, if it just continues to bend, it means the particles are softer. I mean, the particles are smaller. If there's a little like sand built into the clay, it'll break. It'll just crack quicker. So they test it. I mean, they have obviously more sophisticated ways of testing it, but certain clay soils are very, very difficult to get grapevine roots into. Certain clay soils are easier, and obviously clay soils hold water better than sandy soils, obviously. When I first planted these, I didn't really understand that well. I was afraid to plant into the clay because I knew there was clay there, and I was going to have the whole hillside dug up. But in the end, I didn't do it. I just drilled down and planted into it. And
Are you happy that you did it that way?
I don't think it would have made any difference in the long run. I mean, it turned out that these roots are able to get into the soil pretty well.
Well, the proof is in the pudding. Over 30 years later.
Yeah, they're doing fine. So, and it's always green like this. It's not, we live in an evergreen forest.
Do you think that
trees don't get, the only thing that turns yellow when the leaves fall off in everything you see right now is this vineyard. Turns green, turns yellow, leaves fall off, gets dormant.
Do you think the evergreen forest affects the terroir?
I don't know. I mean, the terroir certainly is what makes redwood trees possible in this particular location. It turns out that redwood trees only grow in certain locations on the west coast of California and a few other spots, and not everywhere. And the reason they do is because of the fog and the temperature and the rainfall and maybe also because of the soil. I don't know. Don't know for sure, but I think that the skins of Merlot and maybe Cabernet Franc also are thicker and denser. Something about them that's not as friendly for the birds.
But the birds like the Chardonnay and the Pinot.
Pinot especially because it's the first thing that turns color at the end of the summer. It's the earliest red grape to ripen around here. So as soon as it turns color, boom. I mean, I learned that the second year. I just I don't know what happened the first year. I think the first year I was out here all the time, just shooting off a gun and making noise, running around and putting up streamers, and so I was able to make some wine the first year. But the second year, I turned around. The grapes just started to turn red. I turned around. The next day, they were all gone.
Well, you're living in their home.
That's right. And they were just going out to eat.
Exactly what they should do.
That's how they make a living. So, but after, I don't know when it was, I've decided it was a lot of work. There are a lot of devices to keep the birds off, but none of them, all of them will work for a few minutes. The birds get used to them. So if you use enough of them and it's annoying enough to the birds, then they'll leave because it's just too much trouble. But not necessarily. Depends on the variety of the bird. Some of them will just hang around and just make life difficult. And the police came up here once because I used to just come out here and shoot off a shotgun just to make noise, and you'd see this cloud of birds rise up, and the police came up and said, "What's going on up here? Don't do that. Your neighbors are worried." So anyway.
So what's your secret now?
So now I put up nets. Nets work. They're a lot of trouble, but they work. There's also, I used for many years, I used something called a squawker. Some mad scientists tape recorded birds squawking in distress, and for different varieties of birds. And so you can get a speaker and this machine and these recordings depending on which birds are attacking your vineyard, and you play these miserable bird cries, distress calls, and if you get the right species, they hear it and they fly away.
And it works.
I think it works for a while, and then maybe it doesn't work so much. I don't know. I don't know for sure. So anyway, so now I get a crop of Chardonnay. So my Chardonnays early on were lower alcohol because I would pick them earlier because I didn't want to compete with the birds. Now I don't have to worry. When I saw that, because the sugar level that it was picked at was correct, it was not high. But when I saw that, I just thought, well, this is a disaster. Nobody's going to buy this wine, because at that time 14.2 was ridiculous. Now I don't think I've ever made a Chardonnay with less than 14.2, except recently a couple. But
and that's
my Chardonnays went up, and one of the strange things about my Chardonnay is that it has enough body to hold a lot of alcohol, and you don't really notice the alcohol.
You don't.
So,
how do you get that high alcohol?
Well, one of the reasons, somebody I spoke to at the tasting the other night confirmed this. One of the reasons is if you use a cultivated wine yeast that most people do, but not everybody. Some people, like I think both, maybe all the other guys, Jeff Covenant and Haydu and Shira, I'm not sure that they use yeast anymore. They just use what is called a natural fermentation. It's not natural because a lot of the yeast that are in the fermentation come from yeast that they used previously and are just hanging around the winery. But one of the features of so-called natural fermentations is you get a less efficient conversion of sugar to alcohol. So if you buy a wine yeast, it can be a percentage difference. So if two guys made the same wine, one with bought yeast and one just going by what's in the winery, the alcohol will be could be off by 1%. One could have 13%, one could have 14%.
And so it just happens to be that yours has 14%.
Yeah, so mine are high, and I'm not happy about it. But I haven't been. There's so much panic at the harvest season that being able to, if you don't add a yeast, you have to watch the fermentation very carefully because everything loves sugar. Anything will grow in there. Any bacteria, it's a petri dish. A bin of grape juice is a petri dish. So it's another thing to worry about during the harvest season. So if you add a yeast, you put in such a volume of yeast in right at the beginning, it will eclipse anything else that wants to grow there. Other things might grow there, but they'll be eclipsed by the one you add.
So it's an insurance policy.
It's an insurance policy, exactly. So plus, the way they bred the yeast, breeding the yeast is just like choosing rootstock. You choose it for different qualities. So different yeasts will have a different effect on the wine in the end. So sometimes it enhances certain flavors, acidity. So you can, if you're a good student of the variety of yeasts and what they do to your particular grapes, you can tweak the wine in a particular direction. But to do that, you need a lot of experience, and no way for me to get that much experience with just a few barrels every year.
Right.
Same thing with barrels. There's many manufacturers, and the barrels add different qualities to the wine. And if you have enough time and experience, you can test it out. You can do a barrel trial, put the same wine in different manufacturers' barrels, and then taste them and see which ones you like best, which ones go best with the wine. But that takes a lot of wine and a lot of barrels to do a test like that. I've never been able to do that. So.
Do you feel at this point you have it down to a science?
No. I just feel at this point I've gotten used to the ones that I have. Over the years, I've tried a lot of different ones, one at a time. I've gotten used to the ones that work and leave it at that, both for the yeast and for the barrels. Right. So I early on, I was a little more experimental and conscientious about looking for the best possible outcome, but then I just settled on a few.
I guess that comes with experience.
Yeah.
They say the best bottle of wine is the wine you like, and the people like it. So.
Yeah, and also winemakers, if no matter what kind of palate they have, not all winemakers have great palates.
Right.
And no matter what kind of winemaker you have, everybody has a constituency. There are people out there who will like the same wines you like. Not everybody, but somebody will.
As long as enough do.
Yeah, so.
This is your meditation here, huh? This is your meditation space.
Yeah. Like Yitzhak.
Yeah.
Out in the evening.
Is this your favorite time of the day to go out?
It's my favorite time of day to stay out as long as I can before the sun goes down and then go in. When you're pruning, you start as early as you can. You don't come out at the end of the day.
Right. What time do you start pruning usually?
Well, it doesn't matter. Whatever time I can get out here.
Right. I love that there's no rhyme or reason to any of it.
Well, there's rhyme or reason if it's freezing cold out here.
Well, yes.
And as I say, with the pruning, some of it just becomes habit, and if it works, then you stick with it. But sometimes that is a good thing in life, and sometimes it's not. Like the French, who were making wine in a particular way because that's the way they've been doing it for 200 years. You know, a lot of the French are making wine like they do in California.
Right.
Because even though they could write on the label, we've been doing this for 200 years, they still had something to learn.
Oh, the irony.
Yeah, it depends on your marketing team, what they emphasize. And
If you would have asked them 60 years ago, they wouldn't look at an American.
Right. And the other way around, all the Napa people hire the French consultants
Right.
to come out and give them their Heckscher.
That's a funny thing also. People need to have that other validation in order to say that, either it's good or it's not good. You taste it. Why do you need the other validation? But everyone needs to have that on the label, the marketing. It's such a big part of wine.
It's because it's everybody doesn't have the same palate, and even if they did, they wouldn't necessarily like the same things. So this is an unexplored dimension of the wine world because it's too complicated, and you don't really need to get into it in order to market your wine and sell it. But so in lieu of that, you use medals that you got at a fair, and you use scores that somebody gave, and you try to find some authority that will say something nice about what you did, and because the alternative is to try to find out what a person's palate is like and whether this particular wine corresponds to what they particularly like. And
Right.
There's,
But like you said, it's an unexplored it's an entire undercurrent of the wine world, because if you can't sell it,
yeah.
then you can't continue doing it.
But most people are not buying wine because it's either great or delicious or pretty good or just okay. Most people are not really thinking about it too much.
There's a few exceptions to that.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
that's Four Gates is one of them.
Yeah. No, and there's a lot of people who care a lot and pay a lot of attention to every little detail.
Right. I'm saying, but people who are buying your wine are people who know wine.
I've always thought that they pay more attention to buying Four Gates wine than the average person, simply because they had to find out how to get it, and they had to mail order it. And back in the day when I started, before there was, buying online, it's a big schlep to try to look up a winery and try to and wait for them to ship it to you. And who wants to do that? You have to be somewhat of a nutcase to.
It's become a cult kosher wine. There are not many of them, but your wine has become a cult kosher wine. It today, with the advent of technology, I mean, you put it out one day, everyone knows when it is, and it's gone in a few hours.
Yeah, well, that's partly the secret to that, is that I don't make very much. You can see, it's just a handful of bottles, and it's a little bit easier to sell just a few bottles than it is to sell. How many cases does Herzog make? Like 250,000 cases or something?
How many cases do you make?
What is it, 100th of that or 1,000th of that? I make 250 cases. This year, they were 250 cases.
Wow.
So, what's 250? 1,000?
It would be, 1,000th of it.
1,000th. It's a nice statistic.
It is a great statistic.
Should we take him to your shul?
I want to see the shul.
Well, you can see the shul from here, but it doesn't have its shul quality. It's a shul without walls.
It's the best kind of shul, right?
Yeah. It's the best view. Look at that.
Was becoming more observant. Josh Rindeman is I guess ever since he was a kid, he's always loved airplanes and also fast cars. And every time we were out in the vineyard and he saw a plane fly over like that, he'd study it carefully and he'd tell me what kind it was.
Oh, wow.
So now I look up every time I see to become observant. One of the images from, well, I didn't know enough then to know whether it was Chassidus or just Yiddishkeit that really connected was the idea of elevating the material world for a spiritual purpose. And the experience of growing vines and raising grapes and making wine and making Kiddush was such a perfect illustration of that, and especially, you know, to be able to do that rather than do something else. I mean, it's the same thing that everybody does. It's just more physical, more physically literal. It's just more literal. If you're doing something if you're sitting behind a desk doing something, there are ways in which you're doing the same thing in your life. But if you're a little bit dim and you need a hands-on experience to teach you the same lesson, I mean, it was so when I started making. I mean, the process of making wine and becoming religious happened at the same time. And I think for that was the central point of it.
It was your hands-on yeshiva.
Yeah. Yeah, yeshiva. Isn't there? There's a shiva lamada and a shiva.
Yeah, exactly. And why do you think? I'm just curious because everyone that's the number one quote that you're quoted as.
What's that?
Making Kiddush wine. That you're making your wine to be able to honor Hashem.
Well, I have a whole vort about that. Really, but the kids are so what we, since I don't irrigate, what we see out here are these vines. The rain comes down, let's say from heaven, soaks into the earth, comes up through the vine, supports the life of the vine, fills the grapes. You take the grapes, you crush them, you make grape juice, you make wine, put it in a bottle, put it on the table Friday night, make Kiddush with it. So you have an image of the rain coming down and being elevated back up for Kiddush. So it's like a cycle like that. So it's a mushal for the soul. The soul comes down from heaven, finds its home in the material world here, spends its week. You hope the week is 120 years. Spends its week in the world. You hope gets elevated up into something useful, something sweet and useful, and maybe spiritually significant or powerful. And then at the end of at the end of the week of working in the vineyard, we take a cup and make Kiddush to acknowledge God's creation. At the end of our lives, we're God's Kiddush cup. God holds us in his hand. And what we have raised from the material world and made spiritual, that's what God makes his Kiddush on. So it's the same, it's a sort of a mirror image of what we're raising, and we get from above to below and raise it up, and Hashem sends it down and counts on us to raise it back up with, obviously, the tools we have for the vineyard are Torah mitzvahs, and however we can conceive of making a beautiful world out of what we're given. A good and a beautiful world. So, I don't know if that's articulated
Beautifully.
well enough, but anyway, you got the general idea.
Yeah. After all these years of making wine, why do you think that Hashem wants us to use wine?
So let's. Well, you want to take my answer, huh?
Yeah, I do.
It's interesting. It's interesting you asked that question because that one dimension of that has preoccupied me. I was just talking to the rabbi on Shabbos about it because I finally came to a kind of a realization about it.
I want to hear it.
So here's the problem. Because you like tasting wine.
I love wine.
So here's the problem. What's the relation between, what's this whole world of connoisseurship about? Where does that fit in? So in my mind, I'm thinking one of the reasons we make wine, Kiddush on wine, is because the rabbis, at the time they were thinking about these things, wine was rare. It was I don't know if it was precious, but it was a treat. Let's put it that way.
Expensive.
And it was expensive, and it was known. It was chashuv. So I'm thinking, what does that mean? It's supposed to be chashuv. Means supposed to be good. So good according to a wine connoisseur, good, or so I remember asking a rabbi early on, if you like Manischewitz and somebody comes to your house with a $100 bottle of Bordeaux, which one should you make Kiddush on? Well, this particular rabbi said you're supposed to blend them.
Really? I would say you make Kiddush on the Manischewitz and make Atova Meitiv on the Bordeaux.
So I was struggling with the idea of, if it's supposed to be chashuv, then clearly the people who are tasting wine and finding all of these various delights, clearly that you should make Kiddush on your best wine, right?
Yes.
If that's what it means, but I decided this week that that's not. So I never knew whether should I make Kiddush on the best wine I can, or not. And I always sort of did try to do it all the time with the best wine, or something close. But now just this week I've just changed my mind. And what made me shift my attitude was that if you give somebody a gift, let's say you give a gift to your wife for her birthday. There are two levels of gift. One is, it's the thought that counts. Doesn't matter what you give her. You put a ribbon on it and give it to her, and she'll be very happy and grateful and thank you for it. But if you know your wife particularly well, and you know what she likes, and you know what would really give her a treat, and you give her that, that's another level. So there are two levels. Are they spiritually significantly different? Maybe not. Maybe they're the same. So that's now my attitude about Kiddush, that God wants you to make Kiddush on kosher wine. If you make it with the holy intention, that's all he wants. He's not so worried about whether the tannins are softened yet or not.
It's true.
He just, it's like it says on Simchas Beis HaShueva that God will. How can they just bring water? What happened to the wine? It says somewhere, I don't know where, that if you bring it with the right intention, God will accept your water as if it were wine. What does that mean? It means instead of all the schlepping in the vineyard that you have to do for a year to come up with this beautiful, rare stuff to delight God with, he accepts your holy intention as if you'd done all the work. So I think it's the same. I'm now thinking, let's see, maybe I'll change my mind again, but I'm now thinking it's the same with Kiddush. You bring a holy kosher wine to make Kiddush with, and then if you happen to be a person who delights in wine, then you take it from there, and you continue, that's a separate category.
There's also a separate bracha for it, right? The
Right.
Tova Meitiv.
So do you make Hatova Meitiv?
Every week, every Friday night.
So you're going to show me how to do it.
I will.
Because the rabbis, most rabbis that you ask, they say, well...
I will show you exactly how to do it, with pleasure.
It's not how to do it, it's all the various circumstances. And
I will give you the entire recipe.
Okay, let's go do it.
What I'm fascinated about, because before you told me something that actually really blew my mind, that you love every aspect of it, and
Yeah.
you would never do just one of them.
Yeah,
Like you love the farming and the winemaking, and like you need to do all of it.
yeah.
So when you finally take that wine and you pour it in your glass, what's your kavana? Knowing that you literally did every single thing besides obviously what Hashem does, but every single thing that a human can
main
do.
thing.
Yes. To make that wine.
Yeah, no, I do it. The intention of that moment, I usually do the next morning, but it's like they say that, I don't know where this meme comes from, that when you die, your life passes before you. So that's what happens. There's a moment in the davening where I picture an empty vineyard, an empty hillside, like this hillside without any vines on it. Then I picture planting it, the vines growing, the year in the vineyard where they blossom and the fruit appears, and taking care of them and harvesting them. And then the picture shifts. I go through the entire scope from ground up until in a goblet, in a becher on the table Friday night. Our acknowledgement of the creation is to collect the entire enterprise, the entire material, physical enterprise, in order to, you could say thank you, God.
You're bringing your gift to God, literally.
Yeah.
Every Shabbos.
Yeah.
Like I can only picture, the only example I could think of as you're describing this is when they would bring the Bikurim to the temple, to Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Today, in our times, we don't have anything like it, where the farmer literally did whatever a human could do, and then said to the Kohen, I give it to you now. I give it to Hashem.
But also, in addition to that, is what I just said to you over there, that I'm also thinking that God is making Kiddush on us, making Kiddush.
Wow.
That's his Kiddush.
Wow.
That's what's in his cup, that whole picture.
Why 4 gates? I know this is one of the 4, right?
No, it's not. 4 Gates was, the name came from, the first vineyard I planted was not here. It was down the hillside and in a little valley on the other side there. And there were 4 gates in that vineyard because it was just a barren hillside, sort of like that. I mean, I had to clear it and terrace it and everything, but there was a gate where I thought I was going to build a house, where I thought I was going to build a barn winery, where I had a garden planted in a meadow below, and then a gate that went back up into the forest. And these were my early days. Not even sure I was Baal Tshuva yet in those days. And so in my mind, that was an allegory of life. Home, family, work, and then the gate into the wilderness was spirituality or something like that. So I just kept the name, except when I I had no idea that I was going to make wine for a business. But when I did, then I just kept the name. But then when I kept the name, all of the four gates of Yiddishkeit joined the name. All the four sides of Avram's tent, the four sides of the Mem of Mashiach, Yom V'Kedma Tzafon V'Negba, four letters of Hashem's name, all the fours of Pesach. I mean, every four in Yiddishkeit gets, tags along. So they're all part of the four gates.